Isabella had always been taught that marriage was a crown. A woman wore it with pride, no matter how heavy it grew. As a child, she watched her mother carry the weight of hers in silence. Her mother's hands were always busy, stirring pots, folding clothes, kneading dough, but her eyes were weary. Carrying secrets she never spoke aloud. Isabella thought that was what love looked like, endurance. So when David appeared, with his charming smile and soft promises, she believed she had been chosen for something better. He was attentive in those early days, calling her my queen, telling her she was the kind of woman men prayed for. He promised protection, stability, a future where she would never have to lift a finger in worrying. She believed him because she wanted to. In the beginning, life seemed like a fairy tale. Isabella poured herself into her marriage, the way her mother had poured herself into her home. She woke early to prepare his meals, kept the house spotless, and learned to read his moods like scripture. Friends often teased, "Isabella, you spoil that man too much." She would laugh, brushing them off. To her, service was proof of love. But beneath the laughter, shadows were already forming. David's tenderness often turned to impatience. His impatience slipped into sharp words. The sharp words hardened into scorn. At first, Isabella told herself every marriage had storms. But as the years passed, she felt herself shrinking, piece by piece, to fit inside his temper. Still, she smiled at family gatherings, hiding her pain behind practiced grace. She told herself that silence was strength, that what happened at home must never leave its walls. What she didn't know was that one night, at a dinner table full of witnesses, that silence would shatter, and the man she had built her life around would strip away her dignity with a single, violent act. The first public crack appeared at a friend's birthday dinner. Isabella had interrupted David mid-story, laughing as she corrected a detail. His smile froze, then vanished. In front of everyone, he snapped, "Must you always talk over me? You never let me finish." The table fell silent. Isabella's cheeks burned. She quickly forced a laugh, muttering, "He's just tired. Ignore him." But inside, her stomach twisted. It wasn't the words alone, it was the sharpness of his tone. The way his eyes cut into her like knives. At home, the sharpness only worsened. If the soup was too salty, he berated her. If the shirt wasn't ironed to his liking, he threw it aside. Even the way she laughed irritated him. "You embarrass me," he hissed one night, after a family gathering where she dared to tell a joke. So Isabella began to adjust. She wore quieter colors, spoke in softer tones, and trained herself to smile, even when she wanted to cry. Each compromise felt small in the moment, but together they chipped away at her. Her friends noticed. "Isabella, you don't sound like yourself anymore," one remarked gently. She smiled and lied, "I'm fine. Marriage just changes you, that's all." But the truth was that David was changing her, and not for the better. Still, she hoped. She hoped he would soften again. That the man she married would resurface if she just tried harder. That hope carried her into the night of the family dinner. She cooked for hours, seasoning every dish carefully, setting the table with precision, telling herself this would be the night he'd look at her with pride again. But pride was not what waited at that table. Shame was. The dining room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of cutlery. Isabella moved gracefully between the chairs, refilling glasses, laying out extra bowls, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She had spent the whole day preparing seasoning, tasting, adjusting, wanting this meal to be perfect. David sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his presence commanding. He was in his element, telling stories that made his relatives chuckle. Isabella felt a flicker of relief. Maybe tonight would be calm. Maybe he would be kind. But as she leaned across to place a bowl before his cousin, her sleeve brushed against David's plate, spilling a drop of stew onto the crisp white cloth. The room went still. David's smile vanished. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Isabella," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. "Can't you do anything right?" Her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin. I can clean it up," she whispered. "Don't bother." Before she could react, David grabbed his plate and slammed it into her face. The sound of shattering glass and splattering food echoed through the room. Isabella stumbled backward, stood dripping down her cheeks, her hair clinging to her skin. Gasps erupted around the table. A child whimpered. An aunt cried out, "David." But no one moved. Isabella stood frozen, her breath shallow. her face burning from both the sting and the humiliation. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with sores as her dignity bled out in front of everyone she loved. And then David leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smirked. "Maybe now you'll learn." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. In that moment, something inside Isabella broke, but buried within the shards of shame. A new flame sparked to life, one that would burn far longer than his smug grin. The dining room was no longer filled with laughter. Instead, it rang with stunned silence, the kind that felt heavier than stone. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between Isabella's trembling form and David's smug face. One uncle cleared his throat, muttering, "That was uncalled for," but his words were weak, swallowed quickly by the tension. Others avoided eye contact altogether, staring into their plates as, though pretending not to see, could erase what had just happened. Isabella felt their stares, their judgment, their pity pressing against her skin more painfully than the shards of glass still clinging to her dress. She excused herself in a whisper and fled to the bathroom, shutting the door behind her with shaking hands. Her reflection stole her breath. Food dripped from her hair, streaked across her face. Her mascara had run in jagged rivers down her cheeks, making her look less like a woman and more like a ghost. She gripped the sink until her knuckles turned white, the cold porcelain grounding her as her chest heaved with silent sobs. For years, she had endured his sharp words, his cruelty behind closed doors, telling herself it was her burden to carry. But tonight, he had dragged her pain into the open, stripped her dignity in front of everyone she loved. When she returned, David was laughing with his brothers as though nothing had happened. "She's too sensitive," he said casually, reaching for another drink. "She get over it." The family remained silent, their discomfort thick in the air. Isabella sat down quietly, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not speak. But in her silence, a vow was born. He had humiliated her in front of witnesses, and one day, in front of witnesses, he would regret it. The house was eerily quiet after the family left. Isabella moved through the rooms like a shadow, her body present but her mind replaying the moment over and over. The sound of the plate, the heat of the stew against her skin, the gas that echoed like sirens in her ears. Her phone buzzed the next morning. Messages poured in. "I'm so sorry you went through that. Are you okay? Do you want to talk? Maybe you should forgive him." Men can be like that sometimes. Isabella read them in silence. She deleted the last one. David, on the other hand, carried on as if nothing had happened. He whistled while shaving, hummed while scrolling his phone, even asked her what she was cooking for dinner as if her face hadn't been dripping with food. "Just nights before, see," he said smugly when she set his meal on the table. "You're still here. You'll get over it." But Isabella wasn't getting over it. Something inside her had shifted that night. She no longer cried in corners or begged for tenderness. Instead, she began to observe, to plan. It started with small notes, scribbles of the dates, the times, the cruel words he hurled carelessly. Then came her phone, slipped into her apron pocket, quietly recording his outbursts. Every insult became evidence. Every rage-filled moment became ammunition. She began to collect fragments of his cruelty the way others collected photographs, carefully, deliberately. David thought her silence meant submission, but Isabella's silence had become her sharpest weapon. What he had served her at that dinner table was not just humiliation. It was motive, and she would make sure he lived to regret it. In the days that followed, Isabella carried herself with a calmness that unnerved David. He mistook it for defeat, for submission, but it was something else entirely. She had stopped reacting to his barbed words, no longer flinching when he raised his voice. She simply listened, memorized, and documented. And then, quietly, she began to reach out. Her cousin Clara, who had sat at the dinner table that night, was the first. "I'm so sorry, I didn't say anything," Clara whispered over the phone, her voice trembling. "I froze. But I need you to know. We all saw it. You don't have to pretend anymore." The admission sent a tremor through Isabella's chest, not from shame, but from relief. For the first time, someone had acknowledged her pain without asking her to bury it. Soon, more voices trickled in. A nephew admitted he had recorded part of the dinner on his phone. The footage wasn't long, but it was damning. David sneered. the plate crashing into her face. Isabella stumbling back as gas erupted around her. Proof. Isabella saved the video, her hands trembling as she replayed it alone at night. It was humiliating to watch, but it was also power. She began gathering more. Screenshots of messages where David marked her. Audio clips of his angry tirades. Notes scribbled in the margins of cookbooks. Hidden where he would never think to look. Every piece was another stone in the wall she was building. David didn't notice. He laughed with his brothers, boasted at work, strutted around the house as if nothing had changed. But Isabella had changed. For years, he had been the predator and she the prey. Now, she was the hunter, and he didn't even know it. The whispers started small. At first, Isabella thought she imagined them, the quick glances at family gatherings, the hushed tones when David left the room. But soon it became clear, people were talking. Her humiliation had not faded from memory. It had grown into a shadow that followed David wherever he went. Aunts who once urged Isabella to endure, for peace's sake now shook their heads when his name came up. Uncles who had laughed at his arrogance before now avoided his company altogether. One evening, Isabella's younger brother pulled her aside. "You don't deserve this," he said firmly. "We saw everything. We won't forget. When the time comes, you'll have us." The words struck her like a lifeline. For years, she had thought she stood alone, trapped in silence. Now, she realized silence had turned into witness. She began to test the waters. At the next gathering, she told a harmless story that she knew would irritate David, as expected. His face darkened, his words sharpened. But this time, instead of cowering, Isabella let the room absorb his venom. She caught the disapproving stares, the muttered discontent. David didn't notice. He thought he was asserting dominance. But every outburst chipped away at the illusion he had carefully built. Behind closed doors, Isabella continued her recordings. But outside, she gained something more powerful, allies. People who were no longer blind. People who, when the time came, would stand beside her instead of looking away. David still believed he was untouchable. He mistook the polite silence around him for respect. What he didn't realize was that silence had shifted sides. It no longer protected him. It was waiting for her. By now, Isabella knew David's patterns like clockwork. His temper had a rhythm, his insults a script. He lashed out most when he felt challenged, when he thought his authority wasn't absolute. And she was ready to use that against him. One night, over dinner, she casually mentioned that a neighbor's husband had been helping with chores. "Imagine that," she said softly, "a man washing dishes without complaint." David's eyes darkened instantly. He slammed his glass down so hard water splashed across the table. "Are you comparing me to some fool next door? Do you want a servant or a husband?" His voice rose with every word. Isabella stayed quiet, lowering her eyes in practiced submission. But the phone hidden beneath the napkin was recording everything. Every word, every outburst, every threat. She grew bolder. On another day, she asked, "What if I went back to school? Just a short course." The explosion was immediate. David kicked his chair back, towering over her, his voice thundering through the walls. "You don't need school. You don't need anything but me. Don't you dare defy me again." The recording captured it all, his rage, the venom in his tone, the way his fists trembled as though itching to strike. When he stormed out, Isabella carefully saved the file and sent copies to her cousin, Clara, and her brother, insurance. That night, David returned smug and unrepentant. "Last night never happened," he said, as if his words could erase reality. But Isabella smiled faintly to herself. It had happened, and now she had the proof. David thought he was tightening his grip. He didn't realize he was wrapping the noose around his own neck. The gathering was supposed to be routine. A family dinner at David's brother's house. Laughter filled the room, children ran between chairs, and the smell of roasted meat lingered in the air. David was in high spirits, boasting loudly about work, his voice carrying above the chatter. Isabella sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. But inside, her heart pounded. Tonight was the night. When the room settled and the dishes were cleared, she rose slowly. "Before dessert," she said, her voice calm but steady, "there's something I need to share." David frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Sit down, Isabella. Don't embarrass yourself." But she didn't sit. She placed her phone on the table and pressed play. His voice filled the room, booming, angry, undeniable. You don't need school. You don't need anything but me. Don't you dare defy me again. Gasps rippled through the family. Then came the clip of the dinner humiliation, the crash of the plate. His sneering words, maybe now you'll learn. The room erupted. Aunts covered their mouths in shock. Cousins muttered in disbelief. His mother whispered, David, what have you done? David lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone. But two uncles stepped between them. Enough, one barked. We saw it then, and now we hear it again. There's no denying this. David's face drained of colour. His arrogance, his power, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. He opened his mouth to argue, but the silence that followed him was heavier than any words. For the first time, the family looked at Isabella not with pity, but with respect. And for the first time, David realised he wasn't feared anymore. He was exposed. The room buzzed with tension. David's face twisted with rage as he tried to recover. But his words stumbled out, desperate and hollow. You don't understand. She provokes me. She's twisting everything. But no one was listening. The evidence had spoken louder than his excuses ever could. His brothers glared at him, ashamed. His mother shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. The once proud head of the table now looked small, cornu, pathetic. Isabella, calm and unshaken, stood tall. For years, I endured in silence. For years, I carried the weight of his cruelty alone. But that night, when he slammed that plate into my face in front of you all, he didn't just break me. He exposed himself. And now, so have I. She reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Divorce papers, she said simply. Signed and filed. I have my own place, my own income, and I don't need his name to survive. David's mouth fell open. You can't. You wouldn't. But she already had. The family erupted, some clapping, some murmuring words of encouragement. A cousin wrapped an arm around her shoulders, whispering, finally. David's fury boiled over, but it was powerless. For the first time, he was the one drowning in whispers. His shame the centre of the table he once ruled. Isabella walked to the door, her step steady, her head high. She did not cry. She did not look back. As she left, the finality of it sank in. The woman he thought he owned had slipped through his grasp, and the dignity he ripped from her at that dinner table had become the very weapon that destroyed him. David lived to regret it. And Isabella? She lived free. Thank you for watching till the end. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.